Now, welcome to another edition of Marvel's Cinematic Rankings, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for the first Thor movie. We'll then see how it stacks up against the few other Marvel films we've done already, before I then read and respond to some of your comments. But before all that, let me quickly point out that the poll for the next film, that being Captain America, the First Avenger, is already up, and if you'd like to vote and maybe leave a comment, there will be a link to all my polls in the description below. Okay, and on to the results for Thor, where we'll see that only 5% of voters gave it 5 stars and thought it was amazing, 33% then gave it 4 stars, 50% then went with about average and gave it 3 stars, which left 10% to give it 2 stars, and a final 2% to give it only 1 star, thinking it to be a terrible film. And so when we do all the math here, that means the first Thor movie ends up with a score of 3.29 stars, which puts it a hundredth of a point ahead of Iron Man 2 for second place out of the 4 films we've done so far, and then of course second place among the Phase 1 films with just 2 of them to go. Alright, and before getting to your comments, let me once again say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches on any of my polls. It is all greatly appreciated, as well as a big thank you to everyone who supports me over on Patreon and helps keep this channel going. And so now let's begin, as we always do, with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Jay Makowski, who said, "It has one of the best Stan Lee cameos. Seeing a bunch of people hanging out, grilling, and trying to lift the hammer was amazing, and Stan breaking his truck over it gets me every time." And I mean, one of my favorite parts of MCU movies was always keeping an eye out for the Stan Lee cameo, and they are sorely missed since his passing. In my opinion, he ranks right up there with George Lucas and J.R.R. Tolkien as one of the greatest storytellers of our age. And they're certainly the 3 who have had the biggest impact on me personally. They're part of the reason I want to be a storyteller myself, though I should also give recognition to Jack Kirby and all he did alongside Stan Lee. Anyway, I agree the cameo in Thor was easily one of the best or most memorable, or one of the ones that just quickly jumps to mind. And yeah, I could totally see something like this happening, where one person finds the hammer, tries to lift it and can't, and calls some friends over, and before you know it, they're calling friends over, and you end up with half the town there trying to get a hammer out of the ground. But anyway, let's now move on to this comment from Bryant Hinton, who said, "This is actually one of my favorites. A story about becoming truly worthy, about the inward battle before the outward one. Today's MCU movies are still great, but this is a side I don't feel like they capture as well anymore." And I think what's interesting about the first Thor movie is that usually origin stories or origin movies show how they first get their power, and then they show them learning how to use it, and then finally figuring out what to do with it exactly. The whole "with great power comes great responsibility" thing, which, if we're being honest, is what most superhero movies sort of boil down to. But in this case, or the case of the first Thor film, the whole thing kind of gets flipped on its head, and it's really only the last part of that which we really explore, the figuring out what should I do with these powers that I have part. Even though, yes, Thor was trying to do good before any of this, he thought he was doing good anyway, he was just really arrogant. Anyway, the fun part here is that he learns what to do with his powers by losing them. Again, it's basically the same old story, but turned upside down and reversed. And it was probably the perfect way to bring Thor into the MCU, to bring him down and humanize him first, instead of him always just being this powerful god-like being, essentially, that really we can't relate to. Alright, and next up here we have this comment from Farhead A, who said, "The best thing about the older movies is the characters weren't overly comedic and goofy and felt more in character to what they should be." There's also this one from Interin Commander, who said, "Hot take, I like Thor 1 and 2 more than Ragnarok. Thor 1 has some of the most underrated story moments, music scores, emotional scenes, and comedic timing in maybe all the MCU. A for me, love this movie." Also got this comment from King Doom Gaming, who said, "I always liked the first Thor movie. The acting was good, the soundtrack was good, a lot of things were good, but I don't know if it beats Thor Ragnarok." Then we have this one from Chronosaur417, who said, "I was actually rewatching it the other day. It's hard to reconcile the differences between this Thor and the Thor we get in Ragnarok. Honestly, kind of prefer the one in Dark World and Age of Ultron. He wasn't as naive as he was in the first film and in Avengers, but he also wasn't as goofy and comedic as he was later on. I got to admit, I kind of miss the old Thor." Okay, so I don't want to discuss Thor Ragnarok too much here. It'll have its day eventually when we get to it. But there were a lot of comments about it, so I'll just say for now that I do like and enjoy Thor Ragnarok quite a bit, actually. It is a funny and entertaining movie. but I don't really know if I like it so much as a Thor movie, or should I say I don't like how overtly funny they made the character. And I do get it, especially if you've never read a Thor comic book in your life, that most people, or I think most people, really like the, shall we say, newer version of Thor. Again, the one who's more overtly funny instead of kind of unintentionally funny because he's the proverbial fish out of water. And after Dark World wasn't exactly warmly received, I think they just went with what they thought audiences liked about the character, what was working. So I can't blame them for making the change or embracing, again, what was working. I'm not going to get upset that they adjusted according to what their viewers wanted or liked. I just wish the character was more Thor-like here in the later movies, and I really don't think Love and Thunder is going to be anything but more of the same. Alright, and our next comment up then comes to us from Matej Matthew Burris, who said, "My favorite thing about Thor 1 is its Shakespearean nature, which of course comes from Kenneth Branagh's very specific direction. It really makes the movie stand out among the rest of the MCU for me, even though it's definitely not the best one in the franchise. Too bad Dark World couldn't live up to it. I'm feeling a light 4 out of 5. Then there's this comment from Rachel Furtado who said, "I really like Branagh's aesthetic. Just looking at Asgard and their magic is so cool." Also this one from Russell M. Hussein who said, "I think it was a good start for introducing the more fanciful elements of the MCU after the Iron Man movie. It's just a shame that Thor himself has moved further and further away from any resemblance to the classic comic book Thor the more the movies have gone on." And I do really love the look and style and feel of the first Thor movie, or of Asgard I should really say. It harkens back to what Jack Kirby originally did with it in the comics, yet also is its own unique and cool style, you could say. And I think overall this was a great introduction to completely other aspects of the MCU after Iron Man was really grounded in reality. This started to take us away from that and to show us there's much, much more to the Marvel Universe than you could ever possibly imagine. Though it's also interesting to note that both this first Thor movie and Dark World sort of go out of their way to explain everything very scientifically. They explain that Asgardians aren't gods, and that the 9 realms aren't so much realms, and that the Bifrost is essentially a wormhole, and so on. And I do wonder how Thor and all of this would be introduced into the current state of the MCU, how they'd approach it, since we've long since embraced all sorts of stranger aspects of Marvel Comics. Time travel and the multiverse, as well as magic and Infinity Stones, are all just normal things to the average MCU viewer now, and I mean the one who maybe didn't know much from the comics. Unlike when it started, and again, it was all very much grounded in reality with that first Iron Man movie. So I wonder, would they even bother or care to explain what Asgard is, or what Asgardians are, and how the Bifrost works, and so on? Or would this just be, well, not so much overlooked, but would people just take it in stride and not care so much about deeper explanations? I mean, if collecting 6 stones and putting them into a golden glove lets you snap away half the universe, if we can just kind of accept that, do we really care how the Bifrost works? Alright, and next up here we have this comment from Lone Battle Droid who said, "A really underrated scene is when Odin tells Loki he's adopted, though it feels like the MCU has forgotten Loki is even a frost giant." Then there's this comment from Tyler Prather who said, "Loki's story is more interesting than Thor." Also, we have this comment from Lou who said, "I'm surprised by these results. Thor was the first MCU film with a villain who actually had some depth. People liked him so much that he was again the villain in the first ever superhero crossover film, and just kept showing up throughout the franchise. For this, among other reasons, Thor deserves at least a 4. Then this comment from Miguel Ilas Lopez who said, "It's a great start to a not-so-good trilogy. Loki is obviously the highlight." And then we have this comment from Sunka Schmitz who said, "Thor and Loki are 2 of my favorite characters, and the movie introduced them perfectly. Their relationship and their conflict was interesting and my favorite part of the movie. Also, Ragnarok was way funnier than the other 2 Thor movies, but I laughed a lot when watching this one." We also then have a comment from Taticus Legion 78 who said, "Branagh was smart to have Thor, Loki, and Odin feel like a Shakespearean tragedy about 2 brothers and their father." And I do really enjoy the Shakespearean tragedy feel around the Thor, Loki, and Odin story, and I am a little surprised this film maybe didn't rank just a little bit higher, not only because it introduces Loki, perhaps one of the most popular characters in the MCU, but that it is the start of this story, the start of the Loki and Thor story. And of all the different sort of subplots throughout the MCU, one of the best has to be Loki and Thor. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Michael Crawford who said, Anthony Hopkins scolding Thor is the best emotional scene in the MCU, or at least top 3. And I do totally agree, this might just be the best actor moment in the entire MCU. The mixture of sort of anger and pain in Odin's voice, or the voice of Anthony Hopkins, is perfect and gut-wrenching, but Odin knows he has to do it. He has to teach Thor a lesson somehow if he's ever going to be king, if he can ever take his place. And it absolutely gets me every time I watch this film, and I've watched this film quite a few times. It's a personal favorite of Thor Skywalker, go figure. Alright, and now time for just a few final comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from JRH, who brings up another personal Thor favorite movie, even though I realize it's not a really good movie, but I was a kid when I first watched it. And anyway, they said, honestly, it just felt like the 87 Masters of the Universe, the Dolph Lundgren film. Then there's this one from Chaos Heaven 23 who said, I enjoyed it, I missed the Thor that could be taken seriously. Also this one from Clayton Skywalker who said, coincidentally I just watched it yesterday, having never seen it before. As a casual Marvel fan, I thought it was awesome. Its world building with Asgard and such was amazing, 8 out of 10. Also we had this one from Derek Lopez who said, just like Spider-Man 2, this film pounds Thor to the dirt in order to grow. I'd say this is the best of the Thor trilogy. We also had this comment from Into the Ether who said, to me this is one of the foundation movies and is A tier. The flow of the movie is phenomenal, it doesn't seem to stop and start, and we get introduced to a whole plethora of characters, but it doesn't feel overwhelming because they introduce them all in a natural way. No way could Disney replicate this quality of movie today. Also then this comment from Josh Biggs who said, I thought it gave us a good introduction to the Thor character and it showed him growing as a character rather than him just beating up bad guys. Or then there's this one from Jumper40 who said, maybe the most underrated MCU movie, even though the middle part is too humorous, the movie really grew on me. It has Shakespeare's beautiful tragedy in it, which is also in the prequels. Then there's this comment from Red Hood who said, best Thor movie so far, the only one where Thor both had some character development and didn't act like a buffoon. And finally, we have this comment from Kid Outta Causes who said, I feel like people often overlook the moral lessons and heartbreaking lore that Thor provides for the viewers, just because it wasn't as humorous as Ragnarok or contained as many action sequences that they missed what made it so special. It was about two brothers, one who rose through humility and one that descended into darkness. Almost reminds you of Anakin and Obi-Wan on some levels. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Thor, or what you think of what I or anyone else had to say about it here in this video, or you can go vote on the next poll for Captain America: The First Avenger. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below or somewhere, and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.